So you grew up right on this block?
I grew up in the apartment across the hall downstairs.
So the East Village.
It was the Lower East Side.
It was part of the Lower East Side.
The East Village.
But there's two Lower East Sides.
It was the Lower East Side, yeah. It was the Village East, and then the East Village.
Right.
Today's the East Village.
Yeah.
So it went through 3 transitions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you what year did you start to notice, like you were saying before, there's a bunch of different neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
You here it was the neighborhood like the old movies. Mm-hmm. Everybody, there's peddlers in the street. Mm-hmm. Did they sell like, just food? With food carts still around?
Well, it's bigger than that. Avenue C was push carts with sometimes horses and just push carts. That's where we bought clothes or food or vegetables.
And you bought clothes in the push carts too?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And you had to get undressed when I was a kid in the street and put on these clothes, right?
You had to get undressed in the street?
Yeah. And it stretched probably from 10th Street all the way down to Houston.
Wow.
It was big. People, that's where they did the shopping, or they had the indoor markets that they put them in. Did you ever see those? There's one on First Avenue on 10th Street that goes to 9th Street, where the push carts were put indoors by the city.
Wow.
And they have one down, they're making it into an underground kind of, I don't want to go mall type of thing.
Right.
On Essex Street, this side of Delancey. You'll see this like a 1-story kind of building. So they had all these push carts in there.
It's amazing.
To try to get them off the street.
That's, yeah. Go ahead.
And there was a stable across the street from my school on 12th Street between B and C, where they had horses.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy.
How many horses were in there?
I don't know, I just see horses coming in and out. And I actually had an uncle who sold fruit off of them. And he would bring us all the rotten fruit at the end of the day.
He sold fruit off the horses?
No, he sold it.
Oh, he sold it.
Then he'd bring it here.
Right, and so he'd give you the rotten fruit.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. And was the 3rd Avenue L still there?
3rd Avenue L was there. I remember when it came down.
When it came down, was it crazy? Were there just rats all over? There must have been rats all over the place back then.
Oh, all the time. You couldn't, Avenue where you couldn't, this was a good block because it was actually historically made as the more expensive block, and there were a lot of doctors on this block. I don't know if that was when you were living here.
Well, even when I was living here, it was a nicer block than the other blocks, yeah.
But anything out of this block, maybe Avenue A wasn't so bad.
Well, it's so funny what you say, because you're like, well, it was so much violence. Literally 80 feet away is Tompkins Square Park.
Right.
And it's like a madhouse. Yeah. Now, what years, I know it wasn't 1 year, it was gradual, but what years did you start to go, oh, this is becoming like, this is becoming heroin?
Well, heroin, I was, one of them, when I was in the park, I gently put a knife on my throat, asked me for money.
How old were you here?
I was probably about 11 or 12.
Right. And what year was that?
I was born in 1946. What's that?
57, yeah.
50.
Yeah, and then it became the heroin. This neighborhood was heroin until the 90s.
Yeah.
You
couldn't go in the park around the 7th Street area, mostly.
Yeah, and Avenue B, like you said, Avenue A would be maybe, but there was a lot of after hours on Avenue A.
Yeah. Back
in the 80s when I was down there, was like a lot. Avenue A was still wild, but not like Avenue B.
Avenue B, C.
Just wash your hand on the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Avenue B and C, all the way down to D.
Were wild.
Wild.
And it was like whole blocks abandoned.
Whole blocks abandoned, and then you had the Dragons and the Untouchables. So they
those were the big gangs?
Yeah. Those control those areas, particular blocks. So you really didn't want to walk down there.
So where'd you go to high school? Around here?
Seward Park High School.
Seward Park High School. So yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's the real Lower East Side school. So when you went there, it must have been gangs. Like, you ever see The Wanderers, that movie?
Yeah.
It was probably like 6 different gangs at Seward Park.
Yeah, they put them all in one building.
They did, yeah.
It was bad enough on the street, you can get away from people.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, but in there was just terrifying.
It must have been nuts, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to go to school. How do you even get through class? You must have just keep your head down.
Well, you know, you get used to walking around being scared, honestly.
Yeah.
So it's just part of life.
And just hope you don't hear, the Untouchables are outside.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Big, huge, and then some other gang, if their girlfriend went to school, they'd be waiting outside. You look outside the window. I remember looking outside the window and saying, Savage Lord, whatever they Savage Lords, I think. Savage Lords, look, they're waiting for some other gang, you know.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah, there were gang, particularly in the park there, they had the Tactical Police Force.
What were they called?
Tactical Police Force.
TPF, yeah.
TPK, Tactical Police.
TPF, yeah.
So they would come in every once in a while when they thought there was going to be a gang war. And they would kind of circle the park.
Wow. And you were watching from the window?
Well, I lived on the street. You lived on the street.
It's like a front. I mean, can you imagine if you had phones back then? You would have had a whole movie. You watched.
Yeah.
You watched. When you think about what your eyes saw, how do you think that affected your later job, or do you think it had no effect? It's just random.
Well, it wasn't eyes. I was beaten up by them a number of times.
Right.
Someone tried to stab me. There's a tree across the street, my favorite tree, that they came out. He was trying to stab me because I beat him in the pool. This guy.
Oh, you beat him in the pool and tried to stab you?
Yeah, he was angry.
Jesus.
He was with his friends, and I was saved because it was beat cops.
Right.
I don't know when they went out, but it was beat cops.
Yeah.
And he screamed down from Avenue B, "What's going on up there?" And the kid ran off.
Oh my God! And where was the pool hall?
There was a pool hall in the boys' club on Avenue A and 10th Street. You can play pool there. That's where I played them.
Right.
And there was a pool on 11th Street between 11th and 12th. Now it's a big, what do you call it?
And that's interesting. Now the boys' club is right there. I mean, I think I even remember that, or at least maybe it was.
Yeah.
But you, suffice to say, you grew up fast.
Grew up fast.
Fast. I mean you grew up.
That was just life.
By the time you were.
In fact, maybe I told you, the first fight I had was in front of my school on 12th Street, between B and C, because some Irish kid said,
"Hey,
I must have been 7. You killed Christ."
Right.
Right. I didn't even know. I mean, I kind of.
You didn't know the reference?
I didn't know we killed him.
Yeah. Well, the Italians really did. It was yeah.
Well, but the Irish were getting back for them.
Right. And there was a lot of Irish kids. And did the Irish kids go ahead? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but it made me wonder, how did they learn that at 7?
Yeah.
How do you know I was Jewish?
What's that?
How do you know I was even Jewish?
I mean, right, well, you know, everybody's like, hey, if we don't know this guy. And, but did the Irish live on, like, certain blocks? Italians live on certain blocks? Jews live on certain blocks?
Yeah, Avenue A was more Italian.
Avenue A, that's right.
Yeah, and then you had a whole slew of Ukrainians.
Right, so the Ukrainians.
All these pierogi, I don't know, restaurants over here on Avenue A. And a lot of the Italian kids were my friends. But it was a great neighborhood,
yes,
by the way.
That's right.
Because it was all these families, number one, you know, with like generational kind of thing.
Yeah.
And every butcher shop was different, had all the different ethnicities, which was nice. And then you had little old ladies yelling at you to get out of the street. They're going to tell your mother. So there was, at the same time, a kind of community feeling.
Yep.
And then the interesting thing was the way people celebrated and related. And it was kind of fascinating to live here at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you grew up with all that. And
actually, I missed that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you know, because it is like the New York doesn't have people outside.
Right.
So nobody's outside the street. You know what I mean? When you go back anywhere, I go back to Park Slope, the streets, that's the first thing you notice. There's nobody outside.
Right.
Nobody on the stoop, nobody playing the street. Now, also cars.
Yeah.
Same thing, right?
But back then, there was nothing but people on the street.
Everybody's outside.
Yeah.
All the time.
The apartments were hot or too small or...
Yeah. And everybody's outside the whole night.
Yeah.
Until they went to bed.
Right.
The only time I went was in bed. You had a little transistor radio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then,
right.
I know. It's crazy, huh?
Yeah.
And did you
it started to change in the 60s.
Yeah.
You got
drugs?
Stanley's. No, you had an intellectual group of artists coming in.
That's right.
So it's Stanley's, a bar, I don't know if you know that, on 12th Street and Avenue B.
No.
And it was a bar with these huge sacks of peanuts, and you just put them on the floor, and you can get your drinks, and you had artists in there. And then they opened up an annex on Avenue B between 10th and 11th, where you could dance, and it was the same owners, so it was kind of a more intellectually kind of crowd. So you had all these people, because the rent's cheap.
Right.
Right, so it became a kind of more of a cultural center, which replaced a lot of the village that started.
That's right. The West Village was expensive.
Right.
Started to be expensive for new artists. Right. Like that was the established people.
And this block, I guess it was in the 60s, had the Diggers. I don't know if you know the
Diggers. Yeah. Emmett Grogan.
Yeah. On Avenue A, they all slept down on that corner, and they gave away free food or free clothes, or they had some apartments. And then you had some coffee houses opened up here on the block. And
the Diggers and the Yippies were all connected. It was all like interwoven.
Yeah. Right.
But at the same time, heroin.
So
it was like it was almost an anarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been like. I mean, I'm sure you're in the middle of it, so you're not really thinking about it as much. But it's happening so gradually, and one day you're like, what? Like you're thinking of your childhood, you're like, this has changed completely. Although there were still Ukrainians.
A lot of Ukrainians.
They never left.
Never left.
But everybody else left, Jews, Irish, and Italians.
Jews left. My family was one of the few Jewish families left.
Right. And the Italians left, except they have a couple of pastry stores on First Avenue and the 12th Street.
Yeah, the Di Roberta's, which was on 10th and 11th. The kids were kids I grew up with.
Yeah.
And then you had Venero's. You ever go to Venero?
Yeah, sure.
It was a little dump.
Still, I think it's still there.
No, it's huge.
It is, yeah.
It's a fancy place now.
Wow, so it was small.
It was really small. You had some old Italian men smoking these cigars.
De Noblis.
You know what I'm talking about?
The De Noblis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those little weird, the little cigars. Yeah. But that's so funny. So yeah, they had a little Italian, but yeah, they all moved.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you got Puerto Rican and Yippies.
Yep.
Like all kids. And that was sort of it for 30 years. Yep. And then it became, when did it really, I guess, what year would you say suddenly like people started saying this is a bad neighborhood? Because this was considered a rough neighborhood, 70s, 80s, even into the early 90s, but 70s and 80s, I would not, even when I lived here, I would not go below Avenue B, ever.
Well, you couldn't.
Yeah.
Well, my relatives wouldn't come down here. They wouldn't let their cousins come down here.
They wouldn't?
Yeah.
It was crazy.
They were too afraid.
And you were like, did you feel like, ever think about leaving, or just like, no?
Well, we could leave. My father was a plumber.
Right.
My mother was a school teacher.
Right.
And sometimes I wish it was dangerous, you know.
Yeah, of course. You saw a lot of stuff.
But.
And then you said you got married young.
Mm-hmm. I grew up in an Orthodox family.
In what?
Jewish, Orthodox.
Orthodox.
So when I was 5, I decided to believe in God. I had rheumatic fever at the time, and I was in bed, and I couldn't understand why I was being punished. It didn't make any sense to me. And I can go into the whole thing. Anyway. So,
at 5, that's pretty wild, though.
Which was a big conflict in my family.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Right. So there was someone, I met a girl, not Jewish. She lived on 11th and Avenue A. So we left when we were 16. We got enough money together to go. We wanted to go to California. We ended up going to Florida. That's all we could afford.
That's funny.
Yeah. But part of that was you know, you grow up here, you grow up in an environment, you think that's normal, right? So I was also aware, because, you know, Jewish population, my parents even coming out of the Holocaust, even though they were religious, there was a whole feeling of never again for anybody.
Right.
So there was an involvement with my family in the civil rights movement. Right. So when I went to school, like I said earlier, it was the top 3 classes were white, starting in kindergarten.
Right.
And the bottom were black and Puerto Rican, basically.
Right.
And it made me, I didn't understand having that other perception. How could they know when you're 6 years old who's smart or who isn't? And and then it built up a kind of bias in your head in terms of, well, you'd be afraid. Like I was in 3, kind of borderline, the 3 class.
Oh, you are?
Right, because I had a lot of learning disabilities.
Oh, you did.
Like a lot of comics.
Right.
I think they're just riddled with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was kind of frightening. And then the whole notion of that was frightening. I'm telling you this for a reason. And what we learned in school was slaves were happy. With public school, because they sang in the field.
Right.
This is what we learned. And things like that. And then the only problem was between people who worked in the house, black slaves who had a bit of a deal with the people who had to work in the field. That was the only conflict.
It was inter-office drama.
Right. So, and then there's that kind of learning, which I thought sounded crazy. Who wants to be a slave? Particularly if you know, from Jewish history.
Sure.
Right. Didn't make any sense. So we went to Florida. We took the bus. We went to Greyhound. And when I was going down there, having come from where I was, getting down into the South, people would, you know, mostly black or whatever, poor people who rode the buses back then. And they would say, why don't you go and buy me this when we stop at the center, this food? And I would go in. But it didn't occur to me why they were sending me in, because they couldn't go in. And there were these fountains, actually, for blacks.
Yeah, Virginia, North Carolina, South Georgia, and
even
Florida.
If you walk down to Florida, and we went to Miami, black people get off the sidewalk to walk in the street.
Wow.
It was highly segregated. So, and then we moved into a trailer court, which was a weird experience.
I mean, that must have been the culture shock of all time. You grew up here.
Right. So, anyways.
How long did you live there?
Maybe 9 months.
And then what happened? You just said, we got to get back to New York.
I figured I had to go back and face everything.
But did you work down there?
Yeah, I got a job in a Plaid Redemption Center. You know what that is?
No.
You ever hear of Plaid stamps? Oh. Back then, they had Plaid stamps. You went to the, what do you call it, the supermarket.
Right.
And if you bought something, they gave you, based on how much you spent, these stamps. And then you could redeem them at the center for appliances or whatever.
Like coupons almost. But,
yeah.
But you had to go to a center.
Right.
That's funny. And you worked there?
For a while, yeah.
And then you came back, and did you move back right here, this neighborhood?
Well, I came back here for a little while. We moved to Brooklyn.
Right.
My wife and then my son was born then.
Wow. And then did you start going to school?
I was a high school dropout. And so I went back to, I was a terrible student.
Right.
So they had a night school, Erasmus High School.
Erasmus, sure.
Yeah, so I went there at night.
They had night school?
Yeah. And there was this guy who I'll never forget, who was, I won't say his name, but he's in charge of the school. And I'm walking down there thinking, I want to get back into night school. So he started yelling at me, what are you doing here? And I then explained this thing, and he took me in, he gave me a job in a factoring company, you know, a bank factor, which was, it was like they bought up invoices from big companies like Sony, and they collected them, and they made their profit living off of that exchange. So I was there for a while, and I was going to high school at night. I had a kid, best thing that ever happened to me. And I somehow got into night college, Brooklyn College.
Right, night college.
Yeah. Which I flunked out. Well, I got actually into day college. Got changed jobs, worked in the post office 10, 12 hours a day.
Right.
And then I would go to school in the morning.
Wow.
So
you weren't
I
sleeping?
don't sleep.
You don't even today?
No, I never.
Wow.
Even as a kid.
And you never slept, huh? What's your average amount of sleep a night?
2 hours.
Yeah. Your whole life?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. Well, my father's like that.
Yeah.
So.
And so you're going to night school, then you're studying?
I get off at, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, go to school, come back, sleep for an hour.
That's right. I mean, that's pretty wild. And then, so you go there and did you start to like psychiatry then?
Well, that started because I didn't believe in God.
Right.
And then starting, I figured, well, what do I believe in? Or if...
Right, what do you have to have?
If you don't have a soul, then what do you have? What makes human beings understand that they are conscious?
Right.
Right. So that took me 40 years to write that all down. When I was I finished it, but
oh, nice.
When I was a kid, I used to think, I would, because I had rheumatic fever, I'd be lying in bed and thinking, well, if God doesn't exist, then I used to fantasize, well, what does? And then I thought, maybe he's punishing me. Maybe everyone else believes in him.
Right.
And somehow I'm bad because I don't believe in him. And then I used to fantasize about going through space and trying to get to the end of it, trying to understand the universe, the infinity. And it used to give me a headache, and I had this feeling I'm going to go crazy if I can somehow contemplate this thing. And I had such a headache, I stopped thinking about it, right? But it was, if you talk about what motivates people, they have these, like animals, if you put a deer in a headlight, it freezes. It's the instincts of where they're raised is based on an environment.
Right.
So it only survives in that kind of environment. If you put they're in the middle of a car and the lights, they don't know what it is.
Right.
So they have no instinct to deal with it.
Right.
Well, we have, everything is learned, so we've replaced instincts with patterned ways of reacting. Right? You grow up with critical parents, and maybe you end up critical, or you end up angry, or maybe you withdraw from people, or maybe you're afraid people are going to criticize you, or you look at people in a particular way because that's how you learned how to look at them.
Right.
So there are these patterns, I realize, that come out of how you learn how to relate. If most comics, I think I told you when we talked, I don't know if it's true now, I haven't done a survey, either only children or younger children.
Right.
Right? For a particular reason. Like, that's either if you're younger, you get a lot of attention, you're encouraged to be cute. If you're older, you're the only kid, and so you're also kind of getting all that attention. Most of the comedians I've seen have families that relate through humor. It isn't an accident that they're relating that way.
Right.
The older kids who don't have to compete, not all the only ones, don't know how to do the business end of comedy. They have a hard time asserting themselves. They're more likely to think talent's going to carry them through.
Right.
The younger kids have been fighting like hell to get attention.
Right.
So they're used to scrapping and getting angry and asking for things. So it kind of forms your personality. Well, for me, this whole notion of what do I believe has been a lifelong thing to try to think about, and has motivated me to try to figure out myself and other people.
But that's interesting. So do you say you have a book coming out?
I don't have it coming out. I wrote it after I finally got it that it didn't drive me crazy. I could see from the beginning of the Big Bang how we get to be today.
Yeah? Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus. That's pretty exhaustive. But here's the other point, which is really interesting to me, what you just said. When you said not just comedians have a certain personality, because you've worked so closely with comedians, it's also the business part that you said. It's not just, because everyone's always like, oh, comedians, what's the humor? What are you doing? But you're talking about something else, which I guess only from being that involved, which is, the way we approach the other part, life.
Right.
Life outside of ourselves.
Right.
And this, the sabotage, I'll speak for many, that you will do in the industry, or just the blow up, whatever it is, for whatever reason. Maybe it's not even self-sabotage. Maybe it's just because you're like, I don't give a fuck. Yeah. But yeah, that stuff is really interesting too. Is that in this book, or is that the next book?
No, it's in
Practical.
It's not written about comedians.
Right, I know.
It's all like you look. Just in general, I have learning disabilities.
Right.
If you tell me a telephone number and I have to dial it,
right,
I'll only get the first 3 digits.
Right.
I can't retain audio information. So
right.
when I was in school, I was just dumb, I thought. Back then they didn't kind of analyze that stuff. So for me to be in a class, I would have to listen to the question, memorize it in my mind, and then the thoughts didn't work normally. I had to organize my thinking in a sentence to be able to say it.
Right.
But by the time I got to that, everything moved on.
Right.
I'm just always behind, right?
Right.
And plus I have reading problems, which is, my mind drifts off.
Sure.
I don't know if this happens.
I do have, yeah.
I start to read, particularly I can read a novel.
Yeah.
You don't have to get every word.
Right.
You can get the general idea of it. But if you're reading technical stuff, then you have to concentrate, your brain gets tired, and it just drifts off. I can read the same paragraph and not realize I read it 3 times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not observe anything. But a lot of comics are like that.
Yeah.
So you have all these people who can't sit and write. Well, let's say I write on stage.
Yeah.
And it's a frustration throughout.
Sure.
Because you burn your material. You got to write new material.
That's right.
Right? So they have all these things they're struggling with.
Right, right.
Not counting the kind of families they might come from.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and like you said, but it is interesting, because I've never heard the approach to practical life stuff, aside from the creative stuff, which is always fascinating, but the practical thing of how you approach the business.
Yeah.
Because everyone's kind of their own small business.
Right.
And we find different ways to, and very few people, we were just talking about some before, that actually can pull it off.
They don't know how.
Yeah, they don't know how.
Right. I mean, a lot of it.
And then you look back in the rearview mirror and go, oh, that was unnecessary.
Even on the level of, if you think about it, because this is a hub for comedians.
Yeah.
With all the clubs, all the culture. I have seen people from all over the world. It could be Sweden or Italy or Puerto Rico or Haiti or all over the country here. Most of the people are from here.
Right.
But they come all here. Some of them are funny in maybe Baltimore or whatever it is.
Right.
It's a smaller, Boston even, a smaller venue. But then you come here, you're dealing with a lot of competition.
Yeah.
That's one thing. That's very difficult.
Oh, yeah. That's like they used to say about really beautiful girls go to Hollywood.
Right.
And they're like, oh, shit, I'm not beautiful here.
Right. And then there's the thing, you grow up in the country, right? Like actually in a country. I mean, like at a forest or something, or farmland. And maybe you desire a lot of culture or something, right? And you want to come someplace that isn't boring.
Right.
But then this is overwhelming for some people.
Yeah.
Some people find it great because there's all this stimulation. The other people, it's just overwhelming. They can't deal with the environment just because they grew up in a particular environment.
That's right.
It's just too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's noisy and crazy.
Right, noisy and
too much stimulating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even that has an impact on how they are and whether they can make it here.
There used to be a comedian from Oklahoma, this guy Mark Ingham, he was a friend of mine, and whenever he would bomb and the crowd when it would be silent, he would look at the guy, and he was from a small town, Oklahoma. This was the perfect response. He goes, "It's peaceful out here." It was so funny. It was a perfect line for that guy, you know. Yeah, and I always feel like bombing. I feel like if we're talking about in psychological sense, what do you think? This is Jungian, but what I think it's Jungian. I could be wrong, but anyway, it's what do you think hecklers represent? Like they exist always. In comedy. So what do you think is the reason they exist?
Why they exist? Because they're well, more and more people are going there and they are themselves.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you would think they're going there to have fun, or they want to get entertained.
you would think. Yeah.
But people are different.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I used to make a habit of, I always wanted to see people on stage, just to get a sense of who they were and how they are and what they're bringing up, because you bring your own personality up there.
That's right.
Right, so if you want to help somebody, you want to have a sense of, I mean, I'm only seeing them in an office.
Right.
How they are in the world and how they deal with real life problems. Right. So
you see you see that essence of what they're happy, but you don't get that opportunity with a lot of most patients, right?
So some people grow up with families who think they're wonderful. Right. Right. So they go up thinking they're wonderful, or they think they're funny, and sometimes they don't even get to the mic and everyone's laughing. That's right. Because they're putting out this feeling. That's right. And then you have people who have to prove everything. That's right. So I can't tell you how many people I go over what's the first line I should say. Right. 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 Well, does it matter? It really doesn't matter what the first line is. Right. They're just anxious about how do you prove you're funny to all these people. Right. So then they probably might be more prone to hecklers, some of these people, just because of how they're approaching going up there, where they're in their heads, they're nervous, you can feel the anxiety. They have low expectations of an audience. Somebody who thinks they're good might get angry at a heckler. Maybe that's not a good thing sometimes, right? Right. And don't handle it well. But they handle it differently than someone who they see isn't laughing and everyone else is, even if they're not heckling. This is really deep, interesting stuff. Right. What you're saying. So you're saying it's almost like the energy you're putting out there, where it's like, you know, it's like hecklers pick up, oh, this person's not 100% sure, you know what I mean? And then the response, and for the audience, I know this for the audience, in my opinion, is that they want you to kill these hecklers because that heckler represents every person, the person in your office that's negative to everybody, the person in your life, the person that's criticizes you. Right. So they love when you just kill them because they represent something too. And they're not only represented, they are the crowd, but it's in every situation there's one person like that. And then comedy plays a special role in our culture, or any culture, right? It's also a tool, right? You can make people laugh, you can inspire people. I voted for Dick Gregory first. Right, Dick Gregory, sure, of course. You know, he inspired me. He was great. Right. You can use it to hurt people. Yeah. And it certainly reflects the culture you're living in. Right. Right. So you had the Borscht Bell's comedians. Yes. And then Richard Lewis, I saw him. He was like kind of the beginning of a different kind of personality style. Yes. Up there, and maybe I didn't think about it at the time, but him or maybe Lenny Bruce or whoever opened up a door to being more real up on stage. Right. You didn't have to make up you had a mother-in-law that you hated or something. That's right. Right. You could just be real. Which was tough for the people that had a mother-in-law they hated. They wanted to joke about her. Right. They're out of the loop. There you go. Lenny Bruce started it. Yeah. Then Colin Pryor. Then Richard Lewis was that combination of being yourself. Yeah, but Lenny Bruce broke it open. Yeah. But I mean, and Borscht Bell guys, you knew a lot of Borscht Bell guys too. I knew a bunch of them, yeah. And do you feel like they were, would you say they were,
Were they angrier or just as angry as comedians today?
Just as angry. Just as self-centered.
Because it was a whole different world.
Right.
These Boys guys did not have. There was probably 100. Mm-hmm. We've got like 40,000.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
You know.
It just mushroomed.
Yeah, and it's a whole different world.
Then you only had the Catskills or strip clubs.
That's right.
And this started with what, the Catch a Rising Stars or the Improv, were the only two clubs.
Yeah.
And with a community.
That's right.
A different kind of community, where they all helped each other actually with writing or on stage. And
it was a very innocent place, yeah.
Yeah, it was really amazing. But then it mushroomed.
It mushroomed, yeah. It becomes like anything else. It's like, you know, and in some ways it's much better, because I look back now and I go, oh, the amateur material, nobody ever wrote new stuff. But on the other hand, right, it wasn't it's a lot harder. There's not a softness to it, you know, because it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
When did you start practicing in general?
1972.
Wow. And when did comedians start coming to you, if you don't mind talking about that?
That's soon after that.
Wow.
Like, you know.
Wow. Soon after that, when there were no comedians.
Well, the period then, which you don't, was the counterculture or the 60s, where first you had the 50s and people were breaking out of that Father Knows Best and two beds where women and husbands and sleep in the same bed, and you know, all that kind of thing. And so there was a rebellion against that. First it was the Beats.
Right.
Oh, right.
And they were down here too.
They were down here, but mostly the Beatniks were in
McDougal's. They're by the Cellar.
The Cellar, yeah, the West Side. Coming from here, when you walked up that to the Village, because some of the time I would go up there because I had friends. They had the Women's House of Detention on 12th Street. Maybe it was 10th Street. I don't remember. I think it's 10th Street. You know, the Women's House of Detention.
Yeah, I thought it was on.
It's on 6th Avenue and...
oh, that one. Okay, yeah.
Okay. When I was a kid, that's where all the women who were arrested went. So I had friends, and I'd walk over there on Mother's Day, right? And so you had this intellectual thing that had a mystique about it.
Sure.
In terms of drugs and jail. Oh, by the way, you know Charlie Parker used to lived down here?
Oh, he did?
On Avenue B between 9th and 10th. Yeah. I used to listen to this music when I was very young.
You'd listen to him live?
I didn't know who he was. I mean, it was just, you'd hear him
That's
playing.
Amazing.
It was amazing. But anyway, you walk over there, and you have these kids calling up to their mothers, and their mothers calling down to them, and that part of the West Village. And then you had a whole other thing with, you know, pot and jazz and poetry and all these different things. So
and that Women's House of Detention. Yeah.
And the Women's House.
And that was a beautiful building, that building on 6th Avenue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a castle.
Well, it's not there anymore.
Oh, it's not that library? Is not
No. The library was something else.
Oh.
No, it was huge.
Oh, wow. All right, so, yeah.
Anyway, my point was going to be, which I got lost, sorry for talking so much. My point was that since it's more individualized, no one can be you or me, right? We all have our own personal histories. So if you're going to be unique on stage, at least this is what I try to do. I don't know whether you're good or bad, it doesn't really matter. Well, I did see people, but you can see what they struggle with. The thing that's unique about you is who you are and how you see the world. Right. Nobody can see it the way you do.
That's right.
So and same thing with me. Like, I could write a book. I'm not an intellectual.
Right.
But it is from my perspective on how I see people evolve or how I see the world evolve. And the same thing with comedians. If they can bring that and who they are on the stage, then maybe they have a chance of separating out from other people and being who they are, and people can relate to who they are. And which is beautiful, the more you can connect to the audience, because you can transcend humor, I think, you know, in the sense that you can be a personality who may have something to say and it's funny, but you're memorable in the sense that you can be accessible to people. So they're not just remembering a funny joke, they're connecting to a human being.
Right.
Which is very difficult, I don't care where you are in this society. It really alienates people. The main reason comics come in is because they get in relationships. They have terrible relationships.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? We're human beings, social beings.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting what you're saying too about the distinctive, like all you do is how you see the world, you know, which is also why we're terrible at relationships, because I immediately go back, relationships. But it's interesting what you say about us. I go right back to that. but it makes it so interesting, because when you think about comedy, like that's all it has. We're talking about this other comedian the other day that's selling out all these places. I'm in this business 100 years. I can't describe why he's funny. I can't describe his style. I can't describe, but he's just funny, is what you said.
Right.
He sees the world, and then he just speaks almost facts, and then you just start laughing because it's the way he sees it.
And a feeling about him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
A human being.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, now it's more difficult because the country is so angry and divided that it's just, you know, comedy, like everything else, is reflective
of course,
of all of that. It's divided comedians, divided audience. It's terrible.
Well, with comedy, like you said, it's still about you personally. You have to do. You have to be. If you're not talking from your real self, you're already in a tough spot. Yep. Unless you're the best one-liner writer of all time, which some people are. If you can write one-liners all day, it doesn't matter. But otherwise, but even the one-liners come from you know.
I mean, I've seen people on stage who really have great material.
Yeah.
But then you don't remember who they were after.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's really,
That's right. And I've seen people, great writers, that the audience doesn't laugh at. And they're great jokes. I laugh at them because I'm a comedian. And then some people will go, that guy doesn't have any material. And they kill every night.
Right.
You know?
It's all your personality, who you bring.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's interesting too, the psychology of a crowd and a person and a, you know, what does it mean, you know?
You know, there's a lot of anxiety in getting up, but they get up no matter what, right? They want to be up. That always amazes me, I have to say. I don't know why anyone wants to get on stage, I'm sorry.
Well, not only do we want to get up, I've seen people get up. There's 10 superstars just went on, and you could go to somebody who's been doing it a year, they're petrified, but if you go, do you want to go on? We'll put somebody else, and they go, no, I'll go.
Right. Me, I hate talking publicly.
But what were you saying? You were saying there's people that want to get up and...
No matter what, this is kind of amazing, whatever your background is, it always amazes me, I guess because of me, maybe it's a projection, I don't want to be up there, that they get up no matter what, with all their anxieties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you think about, like, if somehow we were in this room and there was a show and it was just 3 people, 4 people, and you told a comedian, the show, you know, and you said, you could not do it tonight. He'd be like, no, I'll do it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Even though you know it's probably going to go terrible. You can't stop yourself.
Yeah.
It's a real interesting thing. You know, but in a way, anybody that's not like that, they don't last. I feel like you have to be a little bit, I don't know if it's crazy or if it's just your destiny or what it is. You have to be that person that wants to be on.
Yeah. I've seen people, I won't mention names, who have made it, but in the beginning when I used to watch them, they would scare everybody. They got so angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet,
no, of course. Well, figuring out your levels and how much of it, like you said at the beginning of this, how much is you? You're scared, so you get angry, and then people think you're scary.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I spent a lot of years where people were like, "Oh, this guy's just like a badass," and I was like, "What? What I'm saying is not that." But I had such a wall up because I was afraid of not being funny, and like I wouldn't leave any space. I still don't, but won't leave any space in between the joke because I'm want to keep saying, "Hey, this is funny. It's funny. Here's the joke." Well, the Borscht Belt guys were just like they were tumblers. Right. Remember the old tumblers? They would be like the. And just like they were starker, they were like hard guys. They were all like a lot of those early guys who were ex-boxer. They all came from your neighborhood, right? Yeah. For some reason, now this is interesting. I can't believe. Thank God we're still doing this, right? Would have missed this over. Let's think about this. 90% of comedians, early showbiz, came from this neighborhood. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? For the reasons you said at the beginning.
Yeah, it was an avenue you could go in, right?
And you had to survive outside, and you would...
They had all these vaudeville, all these movie theaters were originally...
14th Street, yeah.
Yeah, Academy of Music, but were vaudeville places, right? So there was room for that kind of thing.
And I think also, two things. One is being outside. I feel like anybody that grew up with me knows I peaked at 14. Because that's when you were outside with all these different groups and people, so you had to really be on your toes.
Yeah.
And I feel like Jewish culture appreciated mental dexterity to a degree, and being quick, verbal dexterity and mental, in a way that combined with the outdoor and the lack of any kind of, there was no hiding anything, that it created a lot of comics like that. Maybe, who knows, but it's really interesting that when you think of it, not only were they all Borscht Belt, they came from this neighborhood. Yeah. But then again, all the boxers came from Lower East Side. A lot of things came out of here. Yeah. Everything good. I guess I don't know if the film industry really came out of here, or if they just gravitated here. But comedy definitely did.
The Fillmore?
No, film industry. Oh. I mean, you know how like 14th Street is where it all started when they moved to Hollywood, and but I know comedy came out of here. Pretty wild. Don't you think don't you feel that somehow this has come full circle, that you started on the Lower East Side where comedy started, and then you wind up being this person dealing with these comedians?
Weird.
If that doesn't make you believe in God, I don't know what does.
It didn't. Maybe it's a punishment.
Oh.
I mean, you tell me I'm not funny. Even my kids tell me I'm not funny.
How do you view fame as a force in humanity?
Terrible. I mean, there's a value judgment here about an art form, right? That, of course, for a lot of people who are after fame, or why aren't they more successful after 20 years?
Sure.
It's less about an art, maybe you shouldn't call it an art form, I call it an art form, or the meaningfulness of doing that, and saying what you want to people, or trying to raise their consciousness, or give them a good time. And then it becomes about fame, which I don't think has anything really to do with painting or music, or it becomes about that, and everything is judged by that. And that's our culture. And it makes people discouraged. And it makes it more competitive. Because if you're an individual, how do you compare yourself to somebody else? They can't be you, you can't be them. You're not going to do it the same way. But that's everything. You go to Hollywood. I remember the first time I went to California, I never saw a place where there was not a Ford in traffic. It was all these BMWs. Right. This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
How could that be? Yeah. And with everyone had to have these cars.
Right.
And I'm sure they couldn't afford them.
Right.
Right.
First
all these things become, symbols for whether you're successful or not. And they're just as miserable anyway. They don't solve basic issues. I did my postgraduate training in Heckler Psychology, which is you're a social being, you learn things based on how you see the world based on how you relate. So, for instance, I have friends who became cops who talked one way when we were friends, and the minute they were cops for a couple of years, the way the cadence of their speech and how they saw things just changed within that culture.
That's right.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with this stuff. It's like you get in there and you get competitive and you kind of lose your way and can get discouraged if you can't hold on to where you're there originally. Maybe you love being up there and it's meaningful, and comparing yourself all the time, then it kind of undermines a basic feeling you need to get through all the ups and downs of this.
Right. Well, why can't you have both? What about somebody like me who's famous but is not rich? That seems very unfair.
It is unfair.
That makes me want to believe in God. But but you're right. But here's the beauty of comedy. I still feel like this is once anybody's up there, the audience gives like 2 minutes of grace period, and then you better start making them laugh.
Mm-hmm.
So it snaps us back into reality, at least for that hour. Because people are like, we're here, we paid money to laugh. What do you got?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's the one good thing. It does keep us in the reality, at least when we're on stage. Then off stage, delusion could set in or not. But I mean, on stage you can't play games because the crowd will turn.
Yeah.
It keeps you in the moment,
Right.
But bringing that into real life is another story.
Well, I mean, at least what I've seen, you tend to be more philosophical or have trying to bring a bigger theme to things in terms of looking at the world. So I don't know whether that's as marketable, if you want to call it that, as someone who's up there, or maybe you're an angry culture and you just want to hear people insulting people or whatever. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do like that kind of stuff. I feel, but it does, and like you said, the pleasure still comes from there.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't resent the money and want it, and would cut people's throats for it. But I'm saying, but yes, the pleasure on stage comes from exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I'm sure you feel that way when you're talking to people. I'm sure there's those moments where you're like, I can't believe this is actually connecting with somebody, and that gives you a high, for lack of a better word, when somebody feels like, thank you.
Well, I mean, the good part of doing what I do is most people get better.
It's great.
Right, so you're involved in people growing.
It's great.
Right, so that's great.
Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And you feel like a buzz after, or at least you just feel like, wow, this is something constructive in a world, like you said.
Right.
However angry it gets, you're still doing something constructive.
I mean, I personally don't like compliments in a certain way. I've had a hard time with them.
I thought I noticed that in your eyes, actually, when I said that to you.
Yeah, made me uncomfortable.
What are you, Irish?
Jewish.
That's an Irish thing, too.
I had a genius brother. I was the dummy.
They used to always say they used to always say that about, I once saw this Irish from Ireland comedian, and she goes, here's a compliment to an Irish wife. He goes, you're beautiful, honey. Oh, shut up.
It can be a mean culture. You ever read Angela's Ashes?
Of course.
Oh, wow.
I love it.
That's a great book.
Frank McCourt, masterpiece.
Yeah,
I knew him a little bit,
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Such a nice guy, too. Yeah. And the movie made me cry. I think that's the last time I cried at a movie.
Yeah, it was a good movie.
I bawled at that movie, and they hated it. Of course, Frank McCourt's like, "Oh, they ruined it. They made it too soft or whatever." It's like, too soft? Jesus Christ! It's crazy. He goes, I forget what his criticism was. I was like, "Oh, the people, Irish people, on the other side are a whole other animal."
Like I said, it's really important to hang on to while you're doing it, and the feeling about expressing yourself, and if you're going to survive it.
And it also helps you keep that attitude keeps you from worrying about other people stealing your jokes or anything, because it's you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this. Your eye is still in that area.
Well, that's the thing. If comedians see the world in a funny way, right? That's That's what they've learned. So there's no end to what you're going to be funny about. And a lot of them are afraid to give up their anxiety, or they think the jokes make them funny, so they have to have a set that's in order, and they can't go out of that order. And they're afraid to burn material because they're afraid they won't be creative, or they're even afraid to get better.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You know, I mean, in my view, what I see is that the more you're not controlled by your anxiety, which is neurosis.
That's right.
The more open you are to be funny about other things.
That's right. Yeah, instead of being, because if you're gripping, you can be funny at one thing, but you're gripping.
Yeah.
And you're like, this, it used to drive me crazy when comedians go, that joke's not part of my persona. And it's like, you wrote it. Trust yourself.
Right.
If you wrote it, it's part of your persona. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, they're like, I'm this way. It's like, you're not a character, you're you.
Right.
Which is also interesting about comedy, right? That they, it's like the old joke, they say the comedian does Hamlet and he's terrible actor, you know? We should ask you why you think comedians have tough time acting. And then at the end of the show, people start walking out. It's just terrible. Halfway through Hamlet, the crowd's all walking out. He goes, come on, folks. I didn't write this shit.
You know, the change, too, was, you know, back with the Borscht Belt era, with the rap was comedians can't be actors, right?
Right.
Right. And that's not true anymore.
No, it's not
right?
true.
I mean, in a way, because they build a lot of their acts around their own stories.
Yeah. So
the attractiveness of that is, you know, doing a show on your own
yes.
story, right? And which becomes more, goes a little bit past just telling jokes.
Yeah.
Right? So it's changed. The things have changed.
Oh, it changed.
Yeah.
But when I was really one of the worst actors for many years, and they would bring me in for stuff and be like, I'd talk to them beforehand. They'd be like, I'd be at these big, I mean, money just flew away. And I'd be like talking to the whole studio's laughing. Then I'd start reading and I was terrible, but I could never figure out what it was. And then I figured out it's because I'm trying to be something I already am, funny. You're not supposed to try when you're right, because it's not your line, so you're like.
But also, you don't have to try if you are funny.
That's right.
You don't have to try to be a good guy if you're a good guy.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what do you think of people that sit in front rows for crowd work comedians? Because it almost seems masochistic that they want to sit in front and they know that they're going to be picked on and roasted.
They want to be there. I mean, look at all these anonymous kind of things that's going on. Some people want that. They actually want that. Me, I'm going to sit in the back and hide.
You know what? On that question, that reminds me of what's been happening lately. So Matt Rife and all these other comedians, they'll talk to people in the crowd. The things these people admit, almost like they want to. But I mean, do you think there's like subconsciously they're like, I want this marriage to end, or I want to blow up my job? They say things to the comedian that's going to be on film that is so over the top. It's shocking.
There's nothing personal anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you went through this when you walked down the street here as a kid, you saw somebody talking to themselves.
Right.
You walked across to the other side of the street, right? And now I can't tell the difference between somebody on a cell phone and then the whole sense of personal information it's gone.
Yeah.
And with even what people share on the internet, you know, in terms of Facebook, which I'm not on any of those things.
Right.
Like the shutters, but it's different. There's a different sense of what's personal.
Right.
It's really changed. I hear whole conversations with things that you would never talk about in public.
Yeah. That's definitely true.
Right, and you know, sometimes you can hear a comedian say the most shocking things that are personal.
Yeah.
And they seem like, how could you say that? But it's not personal to them. Some of them, they get off the stage, they can't talk to anybody. That's personal. But they can say the worst things about themselves, or maybe things they've done in their lives that they have no feeling about.
Yeah.
They're not worried about what you're thinking.
So you're saying the audience is becoming comedian in a certain way?
The sense of person, that you're allowed to speak out like that.
Yeah. So the audience is saying,
no permission to do that.
Yeah.